Welcome back to Neal on Fire, where we talk with the people building the future of wildfire detection, mitigation, and response. I'm your host, Neal Spungen, and today I am super excited to be joined by Daniel Doulton, the CEO and co-founder of Solaris Suborbital, a company pushing the boundaries of reusable suborbital launch vehicles, high-altitude flight platforms, and most importantly, promising innovation for real-time climate and wildfire tracking. Daniel, it's great to have you here today.
Hello, Neal. Nice to see you.
So, Daniel, for our listeners just learning about Solaris Suborbital for the first time, give us a simple version. What do you do and what problem are you solving?
Okay, so we have these very advanced ultralight planes that fly on their own. So they're similar to drones, but the big difference is they can fly all the way up into what's called suborbital space, which is the layer between airplanes, commercial aircraft, and other aircraft and satellites. So we go up there and can stay there for months at a time. No people, of course. This is just like a drone, so it's carrying sensors. And the big difference here is that we get to sit still. So we can sit over a spot and monitor it 24/7, 365, which means you get continuous awareness and coverage over areas of high value or high interest. And that's something that you can't do from space because satellites go too quick. They fly around at 17,000 miles an hour, and planes in the layer below obviously can only be there for a short dwell time before they got to go back to base and refuel, etc. So we have what we call the advantage of satellites, but with the operating capability of planes. And it's kind of the Goldilocks zones between space and aircraft below us.
And where exactly is that for people that are kind of more altimeter focused? They want to have a specific number.
Yeah, so the specific numbers are we fly at around 60 to 70,000 feet, so roughly twice the height of a commercial jet airliner, or in European kilometers, it's about 20 kilometers up. So that's significantly above aircraft. We're actually in the last main layer of the Earth's atmosphere called the stratosphere. And relative to where space is, we're at about 20 kilometers. Most LEO satellites, the first layer of satellites, are around 400 kilometers. So they are 20 times further away and hurtling around at around 17,000 miles an hour, whereas we can get anywhere you want on the Earth and sit still right there.
And I'm curious, what inspired you to put this company together? I mean, was there a particular moment or insight or frustration that triggered the mission to start this company?
Yeah, it was really a confluence, if you like, of, I'm going to loosely call it two industries. I came from, and I have a background in AI. And so I came to this and I was introduced to this opportunity back, almost 7-8 years ago now. What I could see in it from an AI perspective was, wow, this is a really unique way of gathering very rich data about the Earth. And there's a very simple rule in AI: the better your data, the better your AI can perform. So, in very simple language, if you go from still photographs, which is what the current product is from space, it only takes still photographs or very short videos from planes. You're very limited in what the AI is going to be able to do to help you understand what's going on in the scene below. But if you give it video, wow, does it perform? It grows exponentially. So the more data, there's an exponential value growth in the way AI can perform. And so when I looked at the what's this for question, I was like, well, that's great from a AI data perspective. What's it for? Well, if you want to protect vast areas, you've got an enormous amount of data that you want to be able to analyze, but you've also got to be pinpoint accurate. So as a good example, in the case of a wildfire or a disaster, you need to be sure that what you're seeing really is something worth deploying resources to, particularly humans, where you can put their lives in danger if it's wrong. But also you don't want to miss the critical ones. It's a great example because there are many. There's something like 50 to 60,000 events in the US a year that need to be attended to, but it's a very small percentage that get away and become the big disastrous wildfires. And that's the last mile, if you like, that I think very rich data like ours with AI can really close out and give us real assurance that we are deploying resources in the most effective way to mitigate the growing natural disaster problem we're living through.
So operating at 60 to 70,000 feet, being able to stay in one place and providing real-time video at presumably high resolution. So you're knocking a few solutions off the table. I mean, does satellite surveillance and remote sensing have a place in real-time wildfire detection now if your technology starts filling in that gap?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand we're not here to replace satellites. That would be a misconception. What we do is we complement what's already in what we call the geospatial data stack. So satellites is a really good, let's start with those, right? So they sit up there. And what satellites do really well is they cover the whole Earth in generally speaking, lower resolution, as in very, very infrequent samples. So roughly speaking, you might get an equivalent of 10, maybe 15 seconds worth of video of daily coverage from a satellite over an area, whereas we'll give you 24 hours of video. But the difference is satellites will cover everything and give you a very wide area of awareness, whereas what we can do is be very specific. So I'll take where I live, California, as an example. We can station ourselves over the really vulnerable areas of California's forest lands, wildland-urban interface, and provide what we call last mile awareness, where we can provide the video grade coverage, where satellites can cover the rest of the US continent and tell you about other conditions. So we actually rely on satellite information to give us a much wider context of understanding, so that when we're looking for things, we have the context and we also have the forewarning of what's likely coming our way. So a very simple example is, I think one most people understand is, seeing long range weather forecasts and watching how weather systems are passing through and evolving is a very useful input to how we monitor and what we're looking at. And conversely, the opposite, when it becomes very dry and there's a lack of rain, is probably a more useful factor. But at least we can start seeing that and get a better understanding of, okay, when we see this is likely a very high vulnerable area versus, oh, it's been raining a lot. That's a different type of condition. So putting that stack together between the satellite data that we can ingest, adding our video, and processing the whole thing through AI gives us the richest insights into what's really going on in a specific scene of high value or high interest.
Understood. Really, it's another tool in the wildfire ecosystem that will allow for more accurate and more precise monitoring of wildfires on a real-time basis.
Yeah, exactly right. And just to give you the example, between, say, a satellite might come by every so many hours. Let's just say, some of the current satellites come by once every 12 hours, take an image and then go, or maybe 6 hours, and some of the newer refresh rates. That's a lot of time between one still image and then waiting for the next one. What we do is cover the gap in between that, and it allows us to shorten the response time. So if you're looking after, you're a fire authority looking after a certain area, you want to see now exactly where all the fires are, they're starting, and actually watch how they evolve. And we can give you that pinpoint accuracy, which shortens not only the time to detection, but critically gives you the advantage of understanding the nature of that fire and being able to make a much higher quality decision whether that's a fire that's a good fire that you can let burn, or no, this is a fire that is actually really dangerous, and get to it now to try and mitigate it spreading any further and becoming, the inevitable breakout wildfire. So that's an incredibly important distinction. And that's why for these applications where you've got anything of high value, high interest, surely you need video. I mean, it's the only way to assure yourself that you really are doing the best you can with your resources and being, as you said, as agile and as responsive as you can to get to things before they become a problem. And that applies across all disaster scenes, not just wildfire.
Got it. Okay, well, we're going to add some video and some images because this thing is really cool. And us talking doesn't really give you the picture, but we're going to have a picture. And when we think about this flight vehicle, you talked about California and the idea that you would have some station on more of a long-term basis at, over certain areas that are wildfire prone. So do you see most of them being in more of a place where they're going to observe long-term, or that they're going to be launched as needed, or a combination of both?
Yeah, so I think the way to think of us, and this is that we're like infrastructure. It's like saying, I need to monitor an area, secure area. You don't just monitor it sometime of the year and then turn it off, turn the cameras off. You leave it on all the time. We're no different. And if you want the space analogy, it's like satellites. Satellites are infrastructure. They're always up there. They're always available. And that allows us to provide, what we call, national infrastructure for either disaster agencies, other agencies that want, like forest agencies, whether it's municipalities. All of them can benefit from continuous observation of large open spaces that are vulnerable, or where you have assets like utilities have, for instance, infrastructure, power lines, gas lines, transportation, etc., all moving through these spaces. So there's an enormous amount of community value in having consistent data being shared back. And that's, again, the satellite industry has done a superb job of doing this at one level of resolution. We've taken it up a whole notch, a whole order of magnitude to improve that capability. And so, yes, as we think of these deployments, operationally, it is correct to have them out there all the time. And there's two reasons for that. The first one is, I'll take fire as a good example, and it's the same sort of structure, if you like, for most disasters. So in simple terms, it breaks into three phases in a year, let's call it that. The first phase is really about understanding the conditions that you're looking at. I'll take forests. How are forests, evolving? What's the growth rates in areas, moisture levels, i.e., what is my risk? What's what they call technically, what's my fuel risk in a certain area over time? And that varies. That is not consistent because it varies depending on the seasons, rainfalls, etc. Other movements and perturbations happen, and it can vary in the space of 48 hours as well. So knowing it only at the beginning of the season, having a snapshot is actually a picture that will degrade quite quickly over time, and your risk map, as they call it, becomes slightly out of date. And that's where you become vulnerable to making not necessarily the best calls on something's happening there. And you think, oh, it's a low risk area. Well, it might have become a high risk area actually in the intervening period. So building that, number one, situational awareness and understanding is sort of phase one. And that's a persistent thing you do regularly. The second thing is during the season, as they unfortunately now have to call it, when fires start occurring, obviously you want to be seeing everything in real time. And as we mentioned earlier, giving our first responders the most timely information, the most accurate information so they can deploy most effectively. The third aspect of it is, and this is a subtle point in phase two, is when there is an incident, you actually want to have eyes on to support the disaster operations. When you're sending, as an example, fire crews in, one of the difficult things is it's very difficult to know exactly where everyone is. There are radio reports coming in. There may be a drone video report seeing something. But don't forget, we're now in an area where the environment is hard to see. There may be clouds, certainly smoke, there's canopy and other debris in the atmosphere that obscures your normal ability to understand where things are. We remove that problem by using radar, which allows us to see through clouds, see day and night, see through smoke, see through canopy, allows you to really understand where is everything in this space whilst I'm tackling a wildfire, as an example. The association with that is you can now make smart decisions about where is it safe to send people and where is it not, because you can now see, as an example, that structure is collapsing or doesn't look like it did an hour ago. It looks like it's leaning over. Do not send something down there. That is a terrible risk. And the same applies obviously for citizens, so that often in these scenes, there are citizens who are unaware of what's going on. We can light that up and show you where citizens are by detecting where phones are, and then being able to give you the ability to message them and give them clear instructions about where they need to go next to be safe. Again, all of that is only possible when you've got complete disclosure, or what they call a high quality common operating picture, so that you can see where everything is and not have to go, sometimes in their minds, patch together disparate information sources. Something came in on a radio feed. Oh, that was an image posted on a social media feed. That came in from a helicopter. And some human has to assimilate all that and then try and make a quality decision based on data that's not necessarily in the same time frame, from the same location, etc. So that wraps up phase two, where it's very intense. And the third phase is after the events happen. People think, oh, great, we've done our job. We can hang up our hoses, put the shovels away and put our feet out. Not true, because there are residual risks that come from a large damage scene. There's structural risks, there's environmental risks. You want to monitor growth rates, for instance, in forests, to ensure that a stable, healthy ecosystem is developing, but you also have residual hazards. So often after these events, it takes months before all the known hazards are understood and contained. If it's in a near-built area, you might have things leaking and things degrading, decomposing, etc. All of that information is vital to be able to, before you get back into your phase one or first part of your next season, you want to make sure that environment's stable and not now a big liability and a big red on your risk map. Yes, long-winded answer, but there is a role for persistent awareness across the whole cycle, whether it's fires, floods, or otherwise.
So a question that I think people might be wondering is, how long can these stay aloft?
Good questions. These platforms are designed to run for at least 2 months, maybe 3 months continuously. But you need to remember something important. We don't just put one up there and then go, oh, we've run out, we better go home and, swap the batteries out and come back. That's typically what it is. It's battery swaps. You actually fly a fleet of them up there. So let's say, for example, you have 20 of them up there. And it's our job. We figure out the scheduling of this. So when glider number one is coming towards the end of its service interval, we've already got another one waiting in standby. It just hot swaps it. And we bring down glider number one. Number 21 takes its place. You have continuous coverage. And that allows us to be up there all the time, like infrastructure.
Are you using any kind of a swarm approach if you have multiple in the air that They're able to track the movement, so you're able to have a much broader coverage. And if one falls out for some reason, the other ones can take up the slack. Are you using that kind of methodology?
Yes, exactly. We employ all those techniques to optimize fleet coverage, or swarm, as you say. We have obviously a mission control center and a flight operations center that's got visibility of all these things on screen. We can make live decisions. We obviously use software as well. It's called mission planning software that helps automate a lot of that decisioning. But yes, absolutely. And our job is to make sure that we have, per what our customer needs, the type of coverage they need. And that's technical language. That's an SLA, a service level agreement, that we put between us that allows us to understand, how do they want us, where do they want us, and when.
I'm sure it may depend on the type of monitoring devices, cameras, et cetera, that you have on the craft, but generally, what is the view shed? I mean, when you talk to people, what is the metric that you'll need one for every X number of square miles, or what kind of math are we looking at on that?
Yeah, so for the highest level of coverage, you're talking anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 square kilometers for very high resolution coverage, which is a very big area when you look at it. And you can go, and of course, we cover wider areas as needed, but naturally, it's called the slant angle. As you look further out, it start becoming, you're seeing them at a oblique angle, so your resolution starts dropping over distance. But that's typically based on the range of sensors we have, anywhere between 3 to, and sometimes 7,000 square kilometers. Sorry, I'm not very good with miles, I'm a European, but we consistently find that is a very big area. So for instance, that almost covers all of Orange County. Just one of those would cover the whole of Orange County pretty much consistently. There are some edges there, because it's not an exact geometric shape of the county, but you can see very quickly that allows you literally a cookie cutter snap out. Okay, we'll just have them all lined up here. And the benefit is, as well as like you mentioned earlier, during the mission, we can move them around. We don't sit still. We're not like rigid infrastructure. The beauty is, as events unfurl or as our customer requires it, we can move them around. We can change what they're looking at. We can change the configuration of what's up there. You can have them flying with different sensors on them. So you can do both, for instance, thermal imaging, you can do radar, and you can do something called hyperspectral, which allows you to really understand the chemistry of what you're looking at below you. You can do mobile phone location services, as I mentioned earlier, so that you can detect where everyone is, locations linked. So you've got the degrees of freedom up there to literally configure your infrastructure and adjust it in real time. And that's the unusual part of this capability.
What are the payload limitations?
So our target for, because we're about to move into production next year, our target payloads are around 10 to 12 kilos of mass. And, typically somewhere between 200 to 300 watts of constant power to the payload. And the reason those are good numbers is because when we designed our platform, and it's a third generation platform, it's the first one we've designed, we actually completely redesigned it around payloads. And that's a big innovation in how you design aircraft and airframes. Why did we do that? Because it allows our customers and us to take off-the-shelf sensors. So there are a lot of sensors that have been developed for space, to go on satellites, to go on aircraft. We are in a position, by designing it this way, to be able to literally take pretty much any sensor off the shelf and plug and play it. And that was a critical design feature. We wanted to make this really simple, that you literally plug a sensor in, power, comms, control, and you're good to go. You don't have to do expensive, lengthy integration cycles. You don't have to do custom sensor development and all that stuff. And that was vital for us because it, as I mentioned this earlier, just now, it allows us and our customers to dynamically adjust to what they need. Oh, you want to fly, you've chosen a sensor, great. It will very likely just plug and play in, and we're off to the races with that one.
Let's talk about the comms for a moment. Since you're sending back real-time video and other sensor data, there could be quite a burden in terms of comms. How does this operate? Are you shooting up to the cloud? What's your go-to-market strategy with such a potentially large data stream?
Yeah. So firstly, off the gliders themselves that's sitting up there, we actually initially will be deploying through satellite communications so that we can get very high capacity, like streaming back down to the ground. And then from there, as you say, we put it into the cloud, into a large instance, and do our processing there. And then we deliver the data products to our customers through that. So that's the basis of the architecture.
Okay. So thinking about live wildfire monitoring, this is really intriguing. I mean, I love the idea that you're in a position to analyze vegetation challenges in advance and then look at kind of the post-mortem as well. But let's talk about live wildfire monitoring. You could have an IR device on there. You could have optical device. You could have sensors of all sorts. And so do you see a specific offering that you're going to be providing for wildfire? You're going to have kind of a go-to-market strategy specifically around this kind of a market?
Yeah, so specifically, yes, we have a solution for people in natural disasters and wildfire. Typically in wildfire, and it depends where you are in the world because there's slightly different requirements, but you typically have obviously a need for a thermal imager to detect, incipient stage fires early enough and monitor them. Radar is also very important product because it allows disaster operatives to see through any conditions and actually understand what's happening on the ground. And radar, by the way, gives you a breakthrough capability because you can see through things like smoke, fire, etc., and understand the rate of fuel consumption. And that is a game changer because it allows you then to be very specific about how fast and how viciously a fire, for instance, is propagating in a certain direction. And there are other features about that as well that help understand that risk front or that fire front. But you also have, as I mentioned earlier, hyperspectral is very helpful for certain incidents. If you're in a populated area, it's really critical to understand, am I putting people at risk by sending first responders into there? Is there actually a leak in the air, on the ground, etc., which is normally not visible. And it's not normally something people are worried about when they're dealing with a fire front. But you also would like to know that. And that's where things like hyperspectral add that additional data layer of what we're looking at to give you, full disclosure of what's happening. You can also look at the risks of chemicals being burnt in a fire and, is the downstream plume. I'm not saying any of them are good, but is it particularly dangerous and we need to go on with a certain kit, or is it, a different type of respirator you could use in that environment? All of those things are options, if you like, in a solution that we have. So that's in the observing it. But there is another layer that we are developing. And for disclosure, we are one of the finalist teams in XPRIZE, in the Autonomous Wildfire Track B. And the solution there is not just detection, but it's also the deployment of, in our case, drones to suppress early stage fires. And that's essential because one of the biggest problems is scaling humans and getting heavy lift aircraft off the ground out to a certain point and able to hit a target fast enough. So with the use of drones, we can sit there, detect the fire, and then we guide the assets in to go and tackle the fire in this case. But we can continue watching it. We can find out whether it was a successful hit or not. Did it burn and go underground and appear 6 hours, 12 hours later somewhere else? And you need to go back and extinguish it again. And so we become this command and control layer as well for the movement of assets, as I was mentioning earlier, particularly for autonomous craft. And that's for me, a very exciting area of growth and capabilities is that we can bring the full stack in for agencies anywhere in the world. And if you imagine, there are parts of the world, not the Western countries in this world, that have larger budgets and far more sophisticated technologies. But one of the big areas of risks are the areas like the Amazons, through Africa, Asia Pacific. They're experiencing bigger and bigger fires every year, or the boreal forests in the north. And it's incredibly hard to place people, helicopters and planes in places and get to them. Whereas we can be above anywhere, zero touch. We don't have to have any infrastructure on the ground. And number two, it's very easy then to have small drone stations put around in strategic locations that don't require massive infrastructure. And they're very light bits of infrastructure. And because they're autonomous, you don't need to have a lot of expensively trained people, staffing, etc. on hand. So the accessibility, if you like, economic affordability of it was also really critical in our design for that solution. And that's why we chose that solution over others that are in the competition.
I'm curious about the go-to-market strategy. So I know you say we quite a bit. I'm wondering, do you envision first responders purchasing these and you're training them and enabling them to use the tech and integrating with existing tech that they may have, drones, other things, or do you see the company offering this as kind of observation as a service? Where do you see going? And it may differ depending on the market you're going after as well.
It does differ a bit, but generally speaking, civilian agencies like disaster agencies, fire authorities, they tend to want things as a service. They don't really want to own specialist aerospace equipment and learn to train how to do it. Not that we won't, if they want it, that's fine. That's an option. But generally speaking, exactly as you say, they just want it as a service. What's less known is the example I gave is where there are deployment drones which can go out and either observe or suppress or, act on the tactical level. That's a little less clear because it depends. Some authorities already have drone capability or helicopter capability, and this would be integrated to their world, and others may not. So I think that second solution has more optionality in which way they'll be purchased.
So thinking through when we talk about the before and the after and the during of a wildfire, in the during and the after, we're talking about the impact on climate, on air quality, on all of those things. And I imagine that these could be outfitted with sensors that could capture air quality and all the other indicators for climate. Is that another piece that you see being able to step into in addition to just monitoring wildfires, but also giving that all important piece of what the air quality and climate implications are as well?
Very much so. And I think that's, more strategic, if you like, set of relationships that we have with people like NASA, European Space Agency, NOAA, etc., where they are bringing the science to bear on how do we monitor at scale exactly the points you make around, climate impact or, atmospheric changes that are really critical to understand, because those are very big, complex systems. And again, we can provide a richness of data that helps their science get to the nub of, what's the real relationship between cause effect, and therefore where do we have most influence in mitigating that problem. So yes, we have, a separate set of, for want of a better term, line of business, which is really about enabling deep science missions as well to support that. And again, some of the sensors I mentioned are applicable, but they also have their own, sensors that they'd like to fly that are very specific to sampling things at high altitude, to monitoring at different layers, etc. So yeah, so it's a very exciting science box, if I could call it that, that we've got ahead of us there.
Well, you've got a reusable launch vehicle that is cost effective, that can stay aloft for months at a time, that can capture any kind of sensor data you want, as well as high resolution video. I'm thinking, where's the downside? Like, there's so many use cases that come up. You have potentially, forgive me for saying this, stratospheric growth, because there's so many opportunities to add an additional layer of surveillance and data that we don't have today. With so many different areas to tackle, what would you say are kind of maybe the top three that you're going after at this point?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I'd say it's a luxurious problem to have, but the word problem means you've got to focus. There's so many different things that we can do with this, so which leads me correctly to what you just said. So the principal areas of focus for us, and the prime ones today, are where there is a disaster of some type, and you need to know now, where every second counts, we're the go-to solution now. We're the only thing that can plug that awareness gap between, things like satellite images, or a drone flew by, yesterday, or a plane was there earlier today. We close that down entirely and give you the now picture. So where does that show up? It shows up in natural disasters. And on the other end of it, I'm going to call it political disasters, where we are in conflict. So we are that disaster awareness capability. And interestingly, our solutions are very similar for both. In fact, the way our planes are configured with sensors and the missions are strikingly similar. And so whilst, I'm going to say the good of humanity is trying to preserve our existence on this planet in a healthy way, we can give those people the tools to try and do early detection of a pending disaster. Again, whether it's a fire or whether it's people acting illicitly or in an aggressive manner, the sooner you can get to that and understand it, the more likely you are to contain and control it. And so to put color on that second category of human disasters or political disasters, in reality, it's things like borders, it's things like conflicts, etc., where again, knowing now and being able to make instant decisions is a game changer. And that's what we're finding is in those scenarios, we become this game-changing capability for operational decision-making, so that hopefully the good guys get the advantage and can stop the wrong things happening to all of us.
Are any regulatory challenges of putting this craft up in the air? Is there anything that you had to overcome in terms of being able to get approval to do this?
Well, certainly, of course there are. Yeah, I'll take, for example, the US, because we're in the US right now, but we operate out of Europe, so it's similar. There is obviously an airspace regulator. In the States, it's the FAA. In Europe, it's depending which country, but it's under EASA, and they regulate the movement of aircraft through the airspace. So both for basically safety of the aircraft. So you need to understand what happens if it breaks up and falls on someone. That's one of the critical areas of safety. And the other one is, how does it operate as as an item of traffic moving through our controlled airspace? So that's the first piece. And I'm sorry to use my hands there. So kind of from ground to roughly 55,000 feet, typically maybe 60, depending where you are, is what's called regulated airspace. So that's where we go through a process with, say, the FAA to get permissions to fly on our way up. For us, it's a corridor because we're just transiting. We're just like a rocket. We're just passing through it to get to our operating layer. Our operating layer is above regulated airspace, which is currently, like space, unregulated. And so once we're up there, it's a very different realm. Now, again, we don't just fly around like bandits and don't tell anyone. I think there was a famous case a year and a half or two ago now almost of the famous balloons that came across into, Canadian and US airspace and had fighter jets scramble in all sorts of directions. We're different to that. We're not there to sneak by. We're there to actively help, something like fire detection. So we will be in touch with the air traffic management, and we'll be filing effectively things like flight plans and letting them know our location, being good citizens whilst we're up there. Because the last thing we want to do is spook people and get them on their back foot. But it's very similar to weather balloons. So people are probably very familiar with weather balloons and other things. They've been going up and using that space now since the 1980s from memory onwards. So it's a regularly used space, but for generally speaking, slow moving craft at the moment. So yes, it's very wide and open because there's virtually nothing there right now.
So when I think about this in comparison to commercial aircraft, I'm wondering, when you look out to the future, do you see suborbital access becoming as routine as commercial aviation for wildfire observation, scientific work, environmental and climate observation?
No, very much so. And, I think, the tangible reality is, our platforms and others who've been before us have already flown and are already up there operating. So it's really a case now of the industry stroke the market now pulling through and deploying it, and that's what's beginning to happen now. Our customers and our ability to deliver has gone from interesting, let's say 5 or 6 years ago when I started in this category and we were educating them, to now them going, when can we have them? How many can you deploy? So, in simple language, I think we're over the hump there, and we're now in the pull through where the markets can expand very quickly. And it goes back to the original point I was making, which is this is a totally new capability. Video over wide areas consistently creates something that everyone's been wanting to have, which is a wide domain of awareness over critical areas. Sorry for the technical jargon, but being able to understand big scenes and make sure that you've not missed anything is gold. And the last point in all of this is not only can we do it operationally, we do something new and better, but we do it for way less cost than, say, a satellite image does. So the simple bit, and people often ask me, how much does it cost? Is it really expensive? And I go, it's really simple. Whatever you pay for a single satellite scene, like one passover, that will pay for us to be over the same area for a full 24 hours giving you video. It's that type of difference. So it isn't just a functionally better capability, but we've also got, as I call it, aircraft economics, not space economics, to access and deliver a much better data product. So I think all of the things are correctly aligned now for this industry to really light up and take off.
So we've talked about a lot. Wildfire, other applications. Is there anything that you feel like we've missed that you maybe want to talk about specifically in terms of using suborbital vehicles like what you have for wildfire intelligence?
Well, I think, when you look at it cross-functionally at different disciplines, I think an important thing, to take in mind is to say, whilst we may say start with providing wildfire coverage and detection, whilst we're there, the information we're gathering, as an example, is really useful to people in forestry, to people who live in the wildland urban interface. If you've got a property like in California, there's a frightening percentage now of people who are at risk. I think it's something like 11 or something million people now live in a risk zone, and their lives potentially at risk because there's no clear path to making sure that that risk is contained and mitigated in the 99% of the cases. That's not true. So that's another example. But as you go across not just users, but you go across disciplines, so the weather service. So there's a really interesting dialogue we've been having with different weather agencies around understanding the risk of flooding. So one of the topics, as an example, is the ability to monitor cloud top temperature changes is one of the best indicators to how much rainfall or precipitation is going to happen. So as a good example, we actually have our main base of operation in Spain. We're not very far from Valencia, but the Texas floods are exactly the same use case. Had we been up there and were we able to monitor cloud top temperature variations, they're telling us this would have given them a very high level of assurance about the severity of the rain and hence the consequent flooding that took place and obviously took so many lives with it. So again, it's whilst you're up there, what else can we do? And the answer is there's a huge range of opportunities to leverage this new capability. And so that's why I keep coming back to it. This is really about infrastructure for good. It should be there permanently, but also for good usage. And the benefit is it's low cost, it's really flexible. You don't have to nail your flag to a mast like you do in space. You send a satellite up, that's it. It's configured for that mission for the next 10 years. There's very little you can do to change what that satellite or that constellation is doing. We're the total opposite. Like, oh, you want to change it? Just land it, swap it around, send it up, do something else with it. So I think we're in this really interesting age where between what we think is a roadmap versus where our agency partners and customers are, there's a very fertile ground, I think, for many new ways of using this capability for the benefit of the planet and humanity. So yes, I think that would leave our listeners with that thought. Food for thought, literally. This is an exciting new area of very low cost intelligence that I think is, and with AI, which I mentioned earlier, you couple that with the AI, our ability to now understand complex systems will grow exponentially in our favor. And that's one of the essential tools that we absolutely need, in our stance and our ability to try and mitigate things like climate change and its impact on all our lives.
Daniel, I have so enjoyed having you here. I mean, I talked to a lot of wildfire innovators, and it's all interesting, but yours is mind blowing. I mean, I'm here trying to figure out what the downside is. It's like lower cost, it can stay in the air for 2 months, incredible view shed. And I know there's something there, but it seems to be an incredibly capable system that you put together and really promises to help wildfire detection and control and suppression over the next several years. And I'm so excited that you're able to join us today. And I'm sure people viewing this are going to want to go to your website where they can learn more. And really appreciate you being here today and sharing everything about Solaris with us.
A pleasure, Neal. Thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of Neal on Fire.